Hello, welcome to another exciting episode of Stan the History Man. I'm your host, Dr. Stanley Sandler, and this is what a relatively brief uh, bit of history. I want to talk about the early days of television, that is, the popular television by the time we're getting it into our homes and so on, not the actual invention of TV. Although I do want to point out that the British claim that they had television before we did, but they had almost like a semi-mechanical television. It had these revolving discs, and the disc would supposedly revolve at the same speed as a disc in the television camera. But I don't think it ever could have really worked that well. And apparently, if the disc could go flying across the room and break right out of the TV set, if it went too fast or something, I just I haven't read much technical idea because I think it's dropped fairly soon. But you have to give them credit; they had TV before we did. We're broadcasting from the Alexandra Palace in Park in London. But the main thing was electronic TV, and that was Elmo Fisworth, an American inventor, I think from Iowa, who you know electronicized, if you will, a kind of word, the television. Now, television, of course, was all black and white. The first television that, well, General Electric had experimental television. If you lived near the city of Schenectady, you could probably pick it up a couple hours a day. And there wasn't much on it. But for the first time that the public saw television with like programs and that sort of thing, sports events and whatever, be in the 1939, 1940 World's Fair. And that was the dream of the future, television. Well, historians often argue about whether war impedes or accelerates innovation. And you could argue, they say, well, television was about ready to hit the market in 1940, but World War II came along and that stopped it. But on the other hand, you could say, oh, the advances in radar and very other electronic communications accelerated the advance of television. Although I should point out the Germans were not behind on this either. A couple of things they were ahead of us. They were broadcasting propaganda television from the Eiffel Tower in Paris, and they even had wire recorders. I remember in the early days, the 50s, we had wire recorders, which is a real problem. Wire recorder, if there's a break in it, you have to tie it together, which means you're going to have a big gap in the. Well, I suppose not much more of a gap than on tape, but still the Germans were ahead that way. I'm not sure exactly why, but they were to some extent. Now after the war, television was it was a period of inflation, which was exactly the opposite of what all the economists said. That after the war, we're going to have a depression because, well, before the war we had a depression, so after the war we're going to have a depression, plus about 12 million men hitting the bricks looking for work, but it didn't happen that way at all. And there's a very shortage of goods, so companies were busy turning out automobiles and refrigerators and whatever. Not television wasn't that high a priority. People weren't demanding television the way they were demanding cars. And just a shortage, a good shortage, and that meant that people were bidding higher for things. So the period of real inflation, which was one of the reasons why people said Harry Truman's not going to get reelected because of all, or get elected because of all this inflation. So TV took a backseat. But about 1948 would be the year that I, from personal experience, remember when, like, our next door neighbor got television and we'd all cluster around the front door and look in to see the television. You could actually see it. I think that shock of the new, as a historian, I wish I could think of his name, said about not just television, anything like wow. And we've lost that. And it's understandable. But I mean, like when people saw the first Model A Ford, wow, we say, oh, they got an old fashioned Model A Ford. But compared to the Model T, that's really something. And the DC-3, the Goonie Bird, well, when it came out, Anne-Maure Lindbergh, who knew a little about airplanes, said, "Well, this is magnificent. It's a flying hotel, air conditioned and shades in the windows and a bathroom and whatever. This is the Great White Fleet." So anyway, the very fact you could see television. I remember some of the radios before the war would have like an extra button or something, and we say that's television. And when television comes in, you just get a screen and you push that button, and you can actually see. The idea of seeing the people that had been talking to you was really an amazing. I said we clustered around our neighbor's door just to learn. They never invited us in either. I don't know why. Bratty kids maybe, but trying to watch it. We were watching the Milton Berle show, that type of thing. But here's a common thing that really irritates me because it's wrong. Many people who should know better, writers and so on, who probably weren't alive at that time, were saying that these early fuzzy pictures. Well, they weren't fuzzy if they were live. They were just as good as a picture you get today, although in black and white. It's when they recorded, and they didn't really start recording until about 1948, 49. I think Bing Crosby show was the first to record, and they basically strap a movie camera over the lens of a TV camera. And the picture, I remember saying at the time, "Why, this looks like a bunch of mashed potatoes thrown against a blackboard." The fidelity was so bad, but that was only as it was recorded. But if they were live, and I remember a number of live broadcasts that are now considered classics, but are lost because they weren't, like Marty and Requiem for a Heavyweight. And these were, I think they were excellent fidelity. So that's a real mistake or whatever. For again, from a lot of people ought to know better, but I've never heard it corrected. They always say, yeah, these fuzzy pictures. It's just like in the early days of photography. Those daguerreotypes, glass print, they were in great detail, and many of them are considered works of art today. So it's just that's one of those assumptions which are not challenged and should be. But anyway, from about 1948 on, with the ending of inflation, basically, if you wanted a TV set, you'd just walk to a store and buy it, and then rig up the outside antenna and try to get it. And a lot of interference in those days. That was one thing that I think we've kind of gotten rid of today. But that was just a major. I remember there's a Norman Rockwell cover shows the guys. He's up on the roof, putting on the antenna, and there you can see the television down there, and everybody's happy. This was something. It was a real shock. And it was, I mean, radio was great, but when you can see this, and of course, ball games and everything. I remember some of the early advertisements. They show a family sitting around a TV watching opera, maybe, or very close up of a football player or something like that. And they didn't have that sort of thing in those days. But I'm saying that the quality was just as good as we have today. And of course, all American TVs in those days, Philco and whatever, were all American. The idea of importing TV sets from Japan, like buying buying cars from Japan would be unthinkable. But it really changed America. It made the first political convention, was 1948. Both the Republicans and the Democrats televised their conventions. The Philadelphia one, I think the votes actually did in Philadelphia in the same auditorium. It was air conditioned, and boy, it was really Philadelphia. Now it gets hot; it gets humid in the summertime. You can just see these delegates all sweating away. So that was another story to talk about. The difference that air conditioning made. But just a brief thing about television in the early days. The big thing, they weren't fuzzy pictures. They were just as good as what we have today, albeit in black and white. Well, thanks again for another episode of Stan the History Man. I look forward to talking with you again. Bye bye.